Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Sunday, 16th of November edition of Proud Malcontent. I'm Pete Bell, and I am Proud Malcontent. And welcome to a bright, sunny Perth today, which you would think would please me. And normally it would, except that when I was setting up the studio, uh, glorify as my studio here. When I was setting it up this morning, it was still dark. So I thought, oh, I really need the lighting. So I unpacked all the lighting kits for the studio lighting that I have, and I set it up. And now the sun is shining brightly, and the lights are totally redundant. I'm assuming you can see me fine, or as well as you would ever want to. As usual, comments are welcome. You can comment on most of the social platforms or on YouTube. So comments are always welcome. Later, we'll be joined by Stephen Duncan for his usual number crunching slot, Confute Corner. And today he's going to be asking opinion polls, who needs them, what use are they? And that's a little bit later. But first of all, as ever, I would take a wee look at something in the news. And I suppose the obvious thing would be the BBC and the trials and tribulations of the corporation at present. They've been caught out on one of their editing faux pas, and only this time they've engaged with Donald Trump, and he's American, of course, and he's notoriously litigious. And he's now threatening to sue the BBC for billions of pounds. Where the BBC is going to get these billions from, I have no idea. But that's the threat. Again, this is a story, and this is only a brief comment that I'm going to make on this. It's one of these stories that has an entirely different slant in Scotland, an entirely different perspective, because where all the commentary online from everywhere else in the world is about how the BBC is buckling under threats from Donald Trump, now giving in to the far right. Apologising to them for, well, right, they did something wrong. They've admitted they did something wrong. And here in Scotland, the commentary is about, well, what's new? We've been getting this for years here in Scotland. It's a constant thing. It's an everyday thing for us here in Scotland. The BBC misrepresenting Scotland to ourselves and to the world. The BBC lying about Scotland. It's an everyday occurrence here. So it's a totally different perspective, and it just highlights why we need our own media. We definitely need control of our media. We need a Scottish eye on things. We need to be shown ourselves as we are. And we need to be able to show the world as we actually are. And the BBC in Scotland is not doing that. It absolutely is not. And it quite possibly never has. It certainly hasn't done for many years. And the 2014 referendum, all we can say about that is that it brought out the worst in the BBC, the number of stories that they distorted then and the manner in which they distorted them. And we never got an apology. Trump gets an immediate apology. We got nothing. And it still continues day in and day out. So it's a different story in Scotland. We see it differently. However, that's not the main thing that I wanted to talk about today. The thing I wanted to talk about actually goes back to earlier in the week. And we have a report from Abby Garton Crosby on the committee, a committee in Holyrood, the Holyrood Committee, sorry, that was questioning three distinguished constitutional lawyers or constitutional experts, and yes, they are all lawyers, and they had some interesting things to say. We're talking here about lawyers, remember, so it's not very often that they say interesting things. But the interesting things that they say might not be obvious to everybody. It depends on the mindset you have coming to this story. There's this Abby Garton Abby Garton Crosby actually has two pieces, and I'll come back to this one. This is her main report on it, but she has another one where she draws out 5 key points as legal experts grilled by MSs on IndyRef 2. So she's picked out these 5 points from her, and well done to Abby Garton Crosby. That's not meant to sound condescending, but she's made a damn good job of this. She's summarised it very well. I'm going to start with the fifth. I'm going to work backwards on this because, in actual fact, is the first one that is the most interesting. And what I have to point out at the moment is that this might get a wee bit confused because they, as I think I mentioned last week, the highlighter in this Chrome installation on this machine is not working, and I've yet to figure out why. I've done all the usual things, and it's still not working. So I haven't got the pieces highlighted that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to just take this fifth one, and this means we might be a wee bit later getting to Stephen, but I apologise for that. Fifth one, the democratic mechanism for independence. This was, oh, by the way, I should say it's a long title. This all happened on Thursday morning. It was an hour and a half session on Thursday morning. It was the Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee. There, you're all a lot wiser now. So point number 4, Scottish Greens MSP Patrick Harvey asked the experts about how the people of Scotland could assert their right to make a decision on a matter of importance that the political process is failing to engage with. Very good question, Patrick. Aileen McHarg, I'll introduce them as we come along. We should all be familiar with Professor Aileen McHarg now. She said that what Harvey suggested was not out with the competence of the Scottish Parliament, but it is out with Holyrood's powers to legislate for an independence referendum, as the Supreme Court previously ruled. She added, if you're talking about creating some other kind of direct democracy mechanism, that would also be subject to the competence limits on the Scottish Parliament. That's a wee gentle lawyerly slap down to the people who are trying to claim that the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that incorporating that into Scots law would somehow allow us to have an independence referendum, a proper constitutional referendum. And she is pointing out that it would not, because it does not change the Scotland Act, and it does not change the fact that the Constitution is reserved. So that's just a wee slap down there. But she also adds, and I will say this, it's Aileen McHarg. I've been quite critical of in the past, but she's the one who's saying most of the interesting things here, at least from my perspective. So she adds, I think there's a degree of uncertainty about how far the Supreme Court would push that idea that the reservation of the Union encompasses things that might have a political effect on the future of the Union rather than a legal effect. She's drawing the distinction between politics and law. And normally, the lawyers will give you the legal perspective. They come at it from a purely legalistic perspective. And you'll remember when I was talking last week about the IFS Autumn Convention, and you remember that I mentioned that Aileen McHarg had said that. Now I've forgotten what it was that she said. I've forgotten the point that I was going to make. I'm sorry. But she was making this distinction that there are things that might be legally not possible, but they're politically possible. And I was saying she came at it because she came at it from this legalistic aspect. She came to a certain conclusion because she was leaving the politics out of it. And I pointed out that once you add the politics in, you come to a totally different conclusion. Things are possible when you put the politics into it that are not possible or are highly unlikely or improbable if you look at it just from a legal perspective. So this is her here very much emphasizing that point that you have to make this distinction between the legal and the political, and that the political can make things possible that the legal says you can't. It can't be done. So that's at one point. 4, a package to put to voters. What this was Professor Tierney. I said I would introduce the lawyers, but this is Stephen Tierney, that's correct, Professor of Constitutional Theory at the University of Edinburgh. And Professor Tierney said that in his view, a referendum was absolutely fundamental. Yes, that's one of the points that I had highlighted, and I totally agree with Professor Tierney on that. There must be a referendum, but I would add that it's very important how that referendum is structured. It's very important what kind of referendum it is. It's not just important that there be a referendum, it's important that it be the right kind of referendum in order that it can give a conclusive outcome. More on that another time. And he mentions that the idea of having a package to take to the people about how Scotland would look afterwards can be very important. Now, I'm agreeing with him here, but he seems, which will seem odd to some people because he seems to be talking about a vision. Well, perhaps he is. Perhaps he is. And you know how dismissive I am of the whole vision aspect of this. But there's another way of thinking about that package. And it's what I'm saying is that we must have, and that is a referendum on a specific proposal passed as an act of the Scottish Parliament, and then a confirmatory referendum on the specific proposal, which includes things like the legislation to enable the constitutional referendum, the confirmatory constitutional referendum, and also a draft constitution. That is about all the vision that we need. That might also have to set up some initial institutions, democratic institutions, but it's a bare bones constitution, and people would be voting on that package in the confirmatory referendum passed as an act of the Scottish Parliament. So people would, and this would be both a determinative and self-executing, the determinative and self-executing legislation, so that there would be a specific outcome, certain things that must ensue from the result. And that it would be self-executing, no further consultation or legislation required. That's it. You get the whatever the vote is, that stands. That is what happens. So and people know exactly what they're voting for, something that we did not have in 2014. Now, nobody knew what they were voting for, because we didn't know what no entailed and we didn't know what yes entailed. So we do it differently this time. That's what I'm saying. And the lawyers seem to be saying much the same. Tierney compared this to the 1998 referendum on the Good Friday Agreement. The 1973 border poll was, this is in Northern Ireland, was largely boycotted by nationalists, and that just made things worse. But in the 1998 referendum on the Good Friday Agreement, the people were actually voting on a package. They were voting on a proposal. They knew specifically what ensued. And there can be problems with that, but the problems that arise in relation to the Irish situation don't apply in Scotland's situation, because we're talking here about an act of the Scottish Parliament. Number 3. Settled will. These are getting gradually more interesting. Scottish Tory MSP Jamie Halcrow Johnson asked the academics for their position on how they would define the settled will of the Scottish people in regards to independence. Professor McHarg, please, explained that there was not a precise definition, but pointed to the 1997 referendum on devolution as an example of an issue being settled before voters were polled. She pointed to a high opinion polling, cross-party support, and the impact of the Scottish Constitutional Convention. And these things together were a powerful force to emphasize the will of the people. But there can be various ways of doing that. She says, Professor McHarg says, I think it would be a mistake for anyone to put a precise number on it. Do you hear that, John Swinney? You do not put a precise number on it. You don't make any requirement, because in fact, it is the will of the Scottish people, even if it's 50% plus 1. 50% plus 1 is the will of the Scottish people. What we're talking about here is not the will of the Scottish people. As I say, that comes with 50% plus 1. That's the will of the Scottish people. That's the democratic way. What we're talking about here is something else, something additional. We want the result to be conclusive. And we want it to be such that it's as close as possible to impossible to dispute that as we can get it. There will always be people who will dispute it. It does, supposing it was a specific proposal and it got 90% in favour, there would still be people who would dispute it. Hardline unionists, really stupid people. We can't avoid that. There are idiots out there. But we have to make it as difficult as possible to dispute. We have to make it as conclusive as possible. Professor Tompkins agreed that there isn't a clear answer on defining the settled will, but argued that the current constitutional setup, listen to this, the current constitutional setup is advantageous because of its fluidity. But that comes with the downside of a substantial dose of vagueness. He explained, Listen carefully. He explained that international evidence sets out that the clearer you are in your constitutional arrangements about laws relating to secession, the harder secession is. You hear that? We don't want we don't want that clarity. We don't want clarity on this issue. If so long as there's vagueness, you can take advantage of that vagueness. You can use the vagueness to your advantage, because if it's vague, you can interpret it and you can act as if it is as you wish it to be, so long as it's vague, so long as these questions aren't answered. So you recall Nicola Sturgeon, when she referred the draft referendums bill to the Supreme Court, saying it was all about getting legal certainty, that she wanted legal certainty. Do you recall her ever explaining why she wanted this legal certainty? What was the value of this legal certainty? I certainly don't recall her ever explaining it. She simply used the term legal certainty as if that was something that was inherently good and good beyond the question. But not so. As we're finding out, the vagueness can be useful. I believe Alex Salmond, I should have looked for his quote on this. I believe Alex Salmond said something similar, that sometimes it can be useful for things to be vague, for things to be undefined, because then you can interpret them in a number of ways, and you pick the way that suits you best, and you act on that. You act as if things are as you would wish them to be. What Nicola Sturgeon did was she got the legal certainty that she wanted. What the hell good did it do us? The legal certainty of the Supreme Court decision. What benefit was derived from that? Prior to the Supreme Court decision, Nicola Sturgeon could have put that bill through Parliament. She could have made it an act of Parliament. She had that ability. She had the parliamentary arithmetic was in her favour. She could have done that. She could have made it an act of the Parliament. Yes, it would then have been stopped. It would have been stopped in some other way. We know that the Union gives the British state the power to overrule the Scottish Parliament. So it would have been stopped, but they would have been stopping an act of the Scottish Parliament, not simply a draft bill. So what did she gain? Before the referral, she could make it an act of the Scottish Parliament. After the referral, she couldn't. She stripped herself of what many would regard as a useful power. It was just an act of political stupidity. And the term legal certainty is one of these glittering generalities. It sounds very impressive, and you would tend to say, if you're not deeply into thinking about things, you would tend to say, yes, legal certainty, yes, that's what we need. That's a great thing. But if you think about it, why? Why do we want legal certainty? Because it's just as certain if it's against us as if it's for us. Whereas if it's uncertain, it can be either of these things. Let's go back to our experts. This is Adam Tompkins still. And he says, I know not everybody in the room wants to see an independent Scotland, which may seem odd to a lot of us. But those who do want to see an independent Scotland should, in my opinion, be careful about pushing too hard against the vagueness. See what he's saying there? He's confirming what I've just been talking about, that the vagueness can give you an advantage. It almost inevitably gives you an advantage, because the being vague, it incorporates the interpretation that suits you. So be careful about pushing too hard against the vagueness. Number two, we're going to skip this because this was Keith Brown asking about their views on the claim that the 2014 independence referendum was a once-in-a-generation event. We know that that was total bollocks from the outset. We've always known it was total bollocks, and the legal experts pretty much confirmed that, but in more lawyerly language. And it's interesting. It's Adam Tompkins. He's a former Tory MSP, of course. But this is him talking with his lawyer's head on, not his politician's head. And as he points out, it's obviously self-evidently not the case that in the United Kingdom, once you've had a referendum on an issue, you can't have another referendum on the same issue. Of course you can. It's a nonsense to suggest otherwise. Right, to number one on the list, and we must move on because Stephen will be waiting. Keith Brown, Deputy Leader, probed the academics on how crucial the people of Scotland's role is in calling for a second referendum. Professor McHarg said that if it became impossible to deny that the people of Scotland want to leave the UK, then there will be a second referendum. She suggested that this would be different than the 2014 referendum, which she said was very much a process of opinion forming for various reasons. She explained, I think we will get to the situation where a second referendum, or we might get to the situation where we get to a second referendum as a confirmatory referendum. Listen to what the professor says, a confirmatory referendum. As the 1997 devolution referendum was a confirmatory referendum of an already established and clearly evidenced will for the people of Scotland to have their own parliament. I do absolutely think that that is where the energies of the independence campaigners should be directed. They are, in my view, wasting their time looking for a kind of legal route to independence. That, a confirmatory referendum, is what is required. Right. This is where I get to say, tell you, because this is very much confirming what I've been saying for the past 6 years, that we demonstrate the will of the Scottish people, first of all, by asking them to demonstrate it in a way that they are most likely to go along with. It's most likely to give us a positive result, and that is by giving them the opportunity to vote on the Scottish Parliament asserting, taking unto itself powers over the Constitution. We could use the 2026 election to do that. And that is a demonstration of the public will. And we could then move on through the process, through the whole Scottish UDI process, until we get to that confirmatory referendum on an act of the Scottish Parliament, a clear-cut proposal for ending the Union. That's what Scottish UDI is all about. And what is interesting for me about pretty much everything said by these lawyers, these experts, is that it all seems to be pointing towards the Scottish UDI process without them actually saying it out loud, without them directly saying that. But Professor McHarg in particular seems to be gradually hinting that this might be the way to go, to have this demonstration of popular will followed by a process leading to a confirmatory referendum. She doesn't say what it would be that was being confirmed. I'm saying it should be an act of the Scottish Parliament with the interim constitution and the legislation for the confirmatory referendum and the legislation to set up democratic institutions, just the basics. it's a keystone constitution. That the vote would, the confirmatory referendum would be on that. I would love to hear Professor McHarg's views on that. Unfortunately, at the IFS convention, we didn't have the opportunity to have any discussion about the Scottish UDI. It really wasn't discussed, partly because the discussion got hijacked by the whole ICC PR thing. It was a big chunk of it was hijacked by that. But also it just wasn't addressed. Nobody was looking at it. And I'm wondering, perhaps that was because lawyers aren't quite comfortable looking at it, because they can't actually come out and say, oh yes, Scottish UDI is the only way to go, but they can hint at it. And if it had come up for discussion, if there had been a real investigation, a real examination of the Scottish UDI strategy, these lawyers could have been put on the spot. That's all I'm suggesting. So we have yet to have that discussion. We have yet to have a proper discussion, a proper debate on the how of independence. I'm grateful to IFS, Independence Forum Scotland, that they gave over an afternoon session to this topic. But I have to say that the topic was not adequately addressed in that session. So no more about that, because it's time to ask Stephen to join us. If I can just, with my shaky hand, find the right button and switch Stephen on. And there he is. There's the man. Hi, Stephen.
Hi.
Yeah.
How you doing?
And I should point out to the good people that we're having a slight, another slight technical problem, where you normally have control of the slideshow. For some reason this week it's not working, and I'm going to have to control it. So there could be the odd stutter here and there. So if you maybe outline for people what it is that you're going to be talking about today.
Okay. Well, they put the first slide up, Peter. It's entitled "Opinion Polls: Who Needs Them, Who Wants Them," and it came about in response to claims that you hear periodically, or maybe all the time, that opinion polls and surveys of attitude are variously biased, irrelevant, and obsolete. So I will address some of these questions, and in the process go through some of the main tenets of methodology that the polling firms use when they're conducting these surveys. So that's the subject matter. So maybe let's go into slide 2. So there's the first claim that you hear fairly often, that the opinion polls are biased. So my response to that is that the opinion polling firms, have an interest in producing objective survey results. The opinion polling firms, or the least reputable ones, are members of a trade association called the British Polling Council. You've probably heard of. It's for market research firms and survey firms. It was established over 20 years ago, and as you're probably aware, it's headed up for the greater part of that period by John Curtis, who was the president, and he stood down last year. It's the guy that's on the Polling Gurus on the TV quite a lot, on the BBC particularly. There's 38 member companies, and they have rules on the statistical techniques, the standards of disclosure, and codes of practice that must be adhered to, and that's a strict condition of membership.
Can I just say here or ask you, see here, Stephen, if people are looking for opinion polls, I maintain that the best place to find them is on Wikipedia, because Wikipedia stick rigidly to the pollsters who are members of this panel. They have Wikipedia imposes high standards. So yeah, that's a place to look for reliable. I'm thinking particularly about the polling on Scottish independence, where Wikipedia only lists polls that ask the same question as was asked in 2014. Which I say won't be the question again, but by asking the same question, you get a comparability. Wikipedia, that's all I'm saying. Find the list of the polls on Wikipedia. And not everybody will want to go to the polling company's own website and get the raw data, etc., and the methodology. But if they just want the polls and a breakdown of them, Wikipedia, doubtless the best place. Okay, am I right?
You're correct. Absolutely, always correct, Peter.
I'm sometimes mistaken. I'm just never wrong.
It's your show. And everything's consolidated on Wikipedia. That's correct. If you wanted more detail, you would go to the individual firms. That again, that's only for perhaps the anoraks. Probably more important than the BPC though is that the fact that these polling firms are private companies, they are for profit, therefore, and are profitable organisations. The clients that employ them pay a premium for impartial and as accurate results, as precise as possible. And the reason for that is that it helps inform and guide their campaigns and plans, be they political, marketing, or sales, whatever. The firms themselves, polling firms, have a reputation to protect, and that has been built up over many years. And if that trust in these firms is output is destroyed or damaged in some fashion, then their business will be severely affected adversely as well. So it's in their interest to produce good, objective estimates for their clients. I would say that where there is bias in opinion polls, it's really only on these, what I call these flash polls that are done, instantly on social media in places like X or Facebook, and also on niche television channels. And the reason why they're biased is they're what is known as opt-in polls, where people who are watching that particular television or following that blogger or commentator on social media, they self-select into these. They're known as, in the business, as self-selected listener opinion polls, or SLOP. You can look it up on Wikipedia as well. That's not an acronym. That's what they're formally referred to. So because they've got a particular audience following that, a blogger or a television channel. The sample is therefore from a specific segment, not a random cross section of the population, and consequently you get skewed results. In fact, you generally get predetermined outcomes, self-fulfilling prophecies, as it were, which can be used for propaganda purposes. That said, these so-called findings, are very easy to refute and to dismiss. So, any questions on that, Peter, before we move on?
No, it's interesting what you say about these online polls, etc. I just don't take them seriously. They can be fun. That's all they are. They're a bit of fun. But it tends to be people who have this must be true of all opinion polls. The people who participate in these polls tend to be people who take an interest in whatever the topic is. Like if they're doing market research for a firm that sells cars, for example, they're going to be asking. They're not going to be asking lots of pedestrians. You know, people who don't
Yeah.
drive, who've never owned, people like myself, who've never driven a car, never owned a car. So to a certain extent, that there's a sort of there's a kind of self-selection working all the time, is there not?
Well, in these polls there are, because it's a particular, it draws an interest from a particular cohort of the population, rather than just people who are randomly selected. So you're not
Yeah,
seeing the
but
whole.
do they not all do that to some extent? I mean, the only people who are going to respond to the questions about independence, for example, who are going to be people who have an interest in the constitutional issue, or do their panels take that into account?
Well, yeah, the panels do take that into account. They select people at random onto that panel,
Yeah.
and then they sub-select from that panel randomly as well. But if you're a particular blog, let's say it's a Peter Bell blog, you're only going to get independent supporters reading your blog. So
Yeah.
that's a biased panel, but that's not the same as somebody. If you stop people in the street and ask them questions, you don't know who you're getting. You know, and that's a random selection of people. If you're standing with a clipboard at the end of the road and speaking to people, stopping people at the end of the road and asking the questions, you don't know who's coming, what their viewpoint is. To begin with. So that's much more random than selecting somebody from Peter Bell's blog who contributes to that. We're all going to be independent supporters, or 95% will be.
It was just one of these odd thoughts that occurred to me there, Stephen. About how do they ensure that their panels incorporate people who have absolutely no interest, people who are completely detached from and alienated from the whole democratic process? But by definition, you can't go out and find these people very easily. And I'm just wondering if how well a random selection draws these people in. But like I say, that is probably not a huge issue. It's just one of these odd thoughts that occurs to me. So we maybe better leave that and get back to the proper stuff.
Okay. Maybe we can move on to the next slide then, Peter.
Right, there we go.
So the next commonplace claim is, the polls are obsolete. So my response to that is that there's a systematic process in place with a common methodology, and that's designed to provide these accurate estimates of the population from the sample. So there's sort of five main tenets of this common methodology, and the first one is that the surveys are carried out mainly on three different mediums: face-to-face, over the phone, and online. Increasingly, it's more online because it's cheaper and the reach, is greater. There's drawbacks to that as well. The sampling procedure itself, as I mentioned already, is that individuals are randomly selected. So you get a cross section of people from all the strata of society. And then you come to the question of what sort of sample size you should use when you're attempting to measure the attribute of interest. And I put a little table there together. There's probably an infinite number of combinations of that you can have, and that's the sample size itself is determined by the precision you want in your estimate, and also the level of confidence that you want in that estimate. So there's some actual examples there. So we'll just take one or two of them. So in that first row in that little table, sample size number 1. If you would like, if you would like your estimate to be, within 3% of the actual measure in the population at large, and be 95% confident that you've got the correct answer, your sample size would need to be 1,067. It's very specific because there's actually a calculation behind that. You can find that out anywhere online if you want to sort of dig into how that's calculated. So another way of looking at that first example, or interpreting that first example, is saying that if you drew a sample size of 1,067 100 times, 95 times, you would the estimate you would get would be within 3% of the actual population parameter. Now, I've just run through the next couple more, and then we'll stop because of time. The second example, if you want to be a little bit more precise in your estimate, so for example, if you got if you were polling on what proportion of people were voted yes, and you came out with an answer of 50%, you would, if you drew a sample of 2,400, you would be expect 95 times out of 100 that answer would be within 2%. It would be 49% to 51% would be what you expected you would expect the answer to be. If you want that example, if you want to be a little bit more precise, to be plus or minus 1%, so really accurate in your estimate, the sample size would shoot up to almost 10,000. So very much more costly in terms of the number of people you'd have to interview to get that level of accuracy if you wanted to maintain that 95% level of confidence. Now, I won't run through all the other examples there, but you can basically hold any one of these three parts of this equation sort of stable, and you can determine what the other two parts would be. But that's roughly how the three things that are taken into account in order to come up with your sample size.
What's interesting about this for me, this is all new to me. This all what you're saying there about how about sample size, etc. What I find interesting about it is it emphasises a point that this is a science. It's a scientific process, and there are all manner. The methodology is designed to ensure that the polls work. And people who are dismissive of them simply don't know how much goes into ensuring that they do work. So I just like to emphasize that point. Polls do work. And which on most matters, they're the best information we have. So just shut up and take them for what they are.
Just to just ram home that point there, it's all based on probability theory, and if people want to look at the specifics of that, then I would suggest to go and look up on the internet, and specifically with regard to binomial distributions, if they want to get a greater understanding of how these different how the whole sampling process operates. The structure of the sample. Moving on to point number 3. What that's referring to there is the different demographic characteristics and recollection variables that we discussed, I think, 2 weeks ago. How the sample needs to reflect what these proportions are in the population, and they do that by means of weighting by these particular factors to ensure that the sample has the same proportions as the population according to these characteristics. Number 4.
Well, before you go on to number 4 there, see, we have a comment from Stuart Wilson who says that don't take that as a definite that only people that are interested in independence for independence sake would be interested in Peter's, I presume he means this podcast. I don't know about that. Sure, why else would that? I'm pretty certain people aren't tuning into this just to see my face on their monitors. So I'm not sure why anybody else. Maybe on a Sunday, there's people who are interested, have an interest in polls and polling, and they're actually tuning in for Stephen and his lovely face. I could understand that. Maybe that's the point that Stuart is trying to make. That is people who have an interest in polls, and they'll want me to stop talking now.
Okay, so just quickly, the number 4, they all have exclusions. Generally, it's the one it's the obvious one, which the people who are not of voting age wouldn't be included. And then there's filters as well. More often than not, that's the turnout filter. Only include those people that are like to vote. Now, I would say that's what I've just gone through there is really a sort of a broad methodology. Within that, the pollster's specific criteria can vary. They just have to adhere to the same sort of the same broad methodology, and that must be published and is published alongside the individual surveys that are carried out by the polling firms. They must publish these, and they do so on their websites. Yeah, the medium may change, but the mechanism remains the same because probability theory has been around for a long time and it's unchanging. Next slide, please, Peter. Right, so polls are irrelevant. That's another claim. Again, I would dispute that. They provide insights into prevailing attitudes and views in the population, what their values and priorities are. As you've said many times, Peter, that's the sole information that's available, short of a full-scale population canvassing, which is the elections and referendums themselves. Polls are used to establish the starting level of support so that you can measure the progress, track any uptakes, any dips in support. You can deploy statistical techniques to analyze this information. I've put an example there on the right-hand side of what are referred to as heat maps. Just run through the top example very quickly, running out of time here. That top table looks at the yes-no sentiment, or yes-no and unknown. And on the right-hand side of that top table, there's a percentage there, 49.76% are in favour of yes, and 43.93% are in favour of no. 6.3% don't know what they feel on the matter or won't say. So if you look at the cells I've highlighted in green for the 16 to 34-year-old age bracket, 67.4% of these people are in favour of independence, according to this poll, which is from Norstat in September. And you can see there's alongside that is an index of 1.36%. What that means is that this particular cell, this particular age group, are 36% more likely more likely to be in favour of yes than the average for the population in total. So that's basically taking 67.43% and dividing that by 49.76%, you get 1.36%. The 35 to 54-year-old age groups, it's roughly 50-50. It's roughly the same. Those people in favour of yes are roughly the same as the overall. So it's 50.76%, plays 49.76%, an index of 1.02. That's amber. And then the red cells are those 55-year-olds and older who are, in favour of no, significantly in favour of no. So it's a sort of a traffic light system. You can sort of identify your sweet and sour spots, look at the opportunities and threats. And the reason what you can use that for ultimately is to tailor your messaging, try different approaches to increase support in these particular segments of the population, try alternative mediums, whether you use leaflets, flyers, TV adverts, etc. And importantly, you need to learn from these. These are basically statistical experiments, and you can adapt your messaging and repeat if you think it's worthwhile or successful.
There's an opportunity to emphasise the point that the most useful thing, from my perspective, about polls is that they can indicate trends, which is why you need the comparability. You need the regular methodology. You have to keep it as the same as much as possible, and you can establish trends so that basically you know when you're getting it right and you know when you're getting it wrong. That's from the messaging perspective. If the polls are going up, you're getting your messaging right. If the polls are going down, you're getting your messaging very badly wrong. If the polls aren't changing at all, and you know what we're talking about, that still means you're getting your messaging wrong. It's just that you're not managing to put any people off, but you're still getting your messaging wrong because you want the trend to be upwards. If you're not getting an upward trend, your messaging is wrong. Again, are you listening, John Swinney? Don't worry too much about the time, Stephen. I don't think anybody's bothered if we run a minute or two over.
Okay, so the one thing I would say just at the bottom of that slide to emphasize is that the sample surveys and opinion polls are only of no value if there is no plan for restoring Scotland's independent statehood. That's when it's a pointless exercise in a sense, and it's sort of where we are, because there is no plans at the moment amongst those people who are able to influence the process. Right, so we can move over to the final slide.
Sorry, I was tempted to ask something about that, but no, I was.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was not asking something that emphasising the point that it is pointless in a way asking people if they want something that they cannot possibly have. And there being no plan, no proposal for restoring Scotland's independence, it is therefore pointless asking people if they want it. The example I gave is that you could have a poll about gold plating the Forth Rail Bridge, and you might get 68% in favour of gold plating the Forth Rail Bridge, but it's never going to happen. Apart from anything else, the whole structure would collapse under the weight. So it's never good. In that sense, it's pointless, and in that sense, polling on Scottish independence is pointless because there is no plan. Gordon Henderson says, why was there no exit polling at the Indy Ref? Well, there we go again, Gordon. That one's been asked before, but maybe Stephen can address it briefly just now.
Well, I don't know why there was no independent exit poll. There should have been exit polling. They're very accurate. The reason why they're very accurate is they usually, certainly in general elections, they usually have, I think, about 10 to 20,000 people. And if you remember that little table that I sort of went through a few slides ago, and you can get a very accurate, you can get a very accurate opinion poll with just 1,000, records. If you get 10 or 20,000 people selected at random, you're going to get a very accurate opinion poll. I don't know why they didn't do it.
Well, the reason given was that the exit polls normally use information from the exit polls at elections. They use information from previous elections so that they can extrapolate the information from a small number of exit polls, so that they can extrapolate that to give a projection, forecast of the outcome. But the independence referendum, sham independence referendum, was a unique one-off events. There was nothing with which to compare it. There was no information there to use in extrapolating. So I don't think it would have served any purpose.
They could have asked, people coming out of the polling stations. They canvass all the different polling stations, a sample of people. How did you vote? Presumably, people answer honestly. You could use that to make your projection. It's just like an opinion poll, but based on actual how people actually voted or say they actually voted.
Again, you come to the question of cost. How many people are you going to have to deploy in order to get a decent sample size?
Yeah, it would be costly, but they have done it. I think ITV used to do it to 20,000 people and they got a very accurate opinion poll in 1987. Can't remember. They got it almost spot on what Margaret Thatcher's huge majority was going to be in the UK general election. But BBC did one as well, and it was miles off because they had about 2,000 people.
Again, that's elections where they have other information from previous. Not an independence, not a one-off constitutional referendum. I think there's good reasons why there were no exit polls done, and the main one was that they weren't going to get enough bang for the buck. It was going to cost a lot of money, and there would be big question marks over the reliability of it. And why bother anyway? Because the only thing that's important is the result after the count. So it just seemed pointless to me that there would be exit polls.
You're going to find out in a couple hours anyway.
We're actually over time now, but I don't care.
Okay, I'll just rattle through the conclusion. Obviously, I don't agree with the opinion polls are biased, obsolete, and irrelevant. I don't think that's true. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misinterpretation about opinion polls, and hopefully, what I've said before try to debunk some of these, if you like. Just to recap quickly, the pollsters themselves are reputable organisations with proven expertise. And they're not like these sort of pseudo polls that can be manipulated on social media, and they're therefore easily dismissed. The proper statistically based opinion surveys, they are certainly in political terms have been around for a couple of hundred years. The first time it was recorded being used was in the USA in about 200 years ago, in the presidential election, but they've been commonplace since the end of the Second World War in the UK and elsewhere. And the reason why they're commonplace and they're always used, probability theory doesn't change. It's a branch of mathematics, doesn't change, and they can be used and they should be used in political terms to guide these campaigns, to establish what works, where it works, when it works, and to learn any lessons about where your campaign's being successful and where it's falling short. You target the audience with nuanced messaging and adapt that messaging as you see fit, and you can monitor that effectiveness and track the progress. Any sort of uplifts or where you're not doing so well, and change accordingly. So that's essentially it, and hopefully that's covered sort of some of the main tenets of the methodology, as well as try to sort of deal with some of the claims and allegations of about opinion polls and their worth in political terms.
I think that's been a very useful, and that's why I'm quite happy to let it run. And I'm happy to be guided by the numbers on this, because our number of live viewers actually went up after the show should have finished. So I don't know what that tells us that we should be doing in the future. A couple of comments here. There's one for Stuart Wilson. on exit polls, he says, positioning, Peter, the exit poll is like a button, a delay switch. If they don't like it, instant switch off. Why they didn't have one. But that seems to be an argument for having one. If they can have one and only use it if the result is one that they like, and then why not do it? That seems to be an argument for having it. I don't quite see that, Stuart. Sorry. And Stuart, again, it only takes one person to get the accurate take at the point of impact of public thought. I've no idea what that means, Stuart. I'm sorry. By all means, engage with me online and explain it to me. For the moment, thank you, Stephen. That has been very useful. I've learned a few things there about polls, and hopefully a few other people have as well, especially the people who tuned in late. And we'll speak again next Sunday. But
Okay, Peter.
Just now, say thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome.
And it's time for me to go as well. We're well over time today. And I just, one thing to say before we go, and that's about the standing invitation that I've got a note of it here. Standing invitation for people to come on to the Wednesday edition of A Proud Malcontent and defend their position against any of the criticisms that I've made. If, for example, and I am only saying this as an example, if, for example, you think John Swinney's strategy for independence is a work of political genius, then by all means come on and tear me to shreds, if you wish. Tear me to shreds in my contention that it's absolute pish, a pile of absolute pish, that it is idiotic, it cannot work, and it can potentially do great harm to Scotland's cause. If you want to defend John Swinney, come on and do that. And just email me. That's proudmalcontent@peterabell.scot. Until Wednesday, when who knows what the hell we'll be talking about on Wednesday. We might even have a guest on Wednesday. We might have somebody take us up on that offer to come on and defend their position against my criticism. Who knows? Anyway, for the moment, goodbye.